It's easy to debate statistics and preach personal responsibility when suffering is just an abstract concept, but Crockett made it personal, not just with her story, but with everyone's. She exposed a hard truth. This country doesn't treat all suffering equally. A working-class white man in rural Ohio is called forgotten, while a working-class black woman in South Dallas is labeled a failure. One gets pity, the other gets blame. That's not just policy, that's bias, affecting every funding choice, zoning law, and headline about who deserves help and who's accused of wasting it. Crockett's point wasn't that urban struggles deserve more sympathy than rural ones, but that both deserve attention and investment, and neither should be weaponized for political gain. She also revealed a deeper truth. Many lawmakers thrive on these divisions. If the poor in rural Ohio start seeing their struggles mirrored in South Dallas, everything changes. Suddenly the questions get tougher, and the people at the bottom begin demanding real answers, threatening the grip on power held by those who benefit from division. That's why moments like that hearing matter, not because they go viral, but because they reveal who's willing to speak up when it's inconvenient, who's ready to get uncomfortable, and who values truth over optics. The day after the hearing, Crockett flew home, sitting in a middle seat in row 27, squeezed between a teacher from Little Rock and a contractor from Pittsburgh. Nobody recognized her. The teacher, reading a book, eventually asked, "You live in D.C.?" Crockett smiled. "Sometimes I work there." The woman nodded. "It's loud over there," Crockett replied. "Too loud sometimes, but I try to speak for folks who don't have the mic." The teacher paused, looked at her thoughtfully, and said, "Well, if you're fighting for people who can't afford first class, you're in the right. Row." They laughed softly. Not dramatic, not profound. But that moment meant more to Crockett than any headline. That's who she was fighting for. Not just those who could donate or vote, but the ones crammed in economy, struggling to stay, afloat wondering if anyone in D.C. even knew they existed. She wasn't perfect, she'd admit that, but she wasn't afraid to speak the truth, and in a world full of political performances, that was rare. That hearing didn't change the system overnight, but it reminded people, loudly and publicly, that their stories mattered, that someone saw them, and sometimes that's where change begins. A week later, Crockett stood outside a small community center in Lancaster, Texas. No cameras, no press, just folding chairs, clipboards, and locals asking about rent assistance, code enforcement, and a potential housing program. Near the end, a man in his late 60s, wearing a faded cowboy's jacket and work boots, raised his hand. He didn't ask about legislation or funding. He just asked, "Do they listen when you talk like that up there?" Crockett didn't answer right away. She looked at the man, then around the room at others who had probably wondered the same thing. "Not always," she replied. "But I don't speak so they'll feel comfortable. I speak so y'all don't feel invisible." That was the real victory. Not shaming Senator Vance or going viral, but making people feel seen in places where they rarely are. It wasn't about grandstanding. It was about representation. A congresswoman talking like someone who'd actually stood in their shoes, not pretending, not posturing, just telling the truth. Politics isn't just about laws. It's about memory, whose reality gets acknowledged, whose pain gets validated, whose resilience gets ignored. When Crockett shared stories about eviction or mentioned Terry in Ohio and Ronnie with his space heater, she wasn't performing. She was putting real lives on the record, declaring, "These people exist. Their struggles aren't accidents. Their poverty isn't a footnote." Whether you live in a brick apartment in South Dallas or a trailer off a dirt road, the reality is the same. Lives often ignored until someone forces them into the spotlight. Phones came out, notes were scribbled. "You stayed 3 nights in a luxury suite. I've got the invoice right here," Jasmine said, tapping the paper. "Paid in full by Orbit, not disclosed on your financial disclosures, not once." Green's face twitched. "That's not mine to disclose," she argued. "He offered to stay. I didn't pay for it." Exactly, Jasmine replied. Which is the problem. Accepting unreported gifts from individuals under federal investigation while sitting on the oversight committee isn't just shady. It's unethical, possibly criminal. The chair looked up from his notes, but didn't stop her. No one did. Jasmine flipped the page. May 2023, Sedona, another private flight, this one chartered by a group of donors tied to West Burbridge Energy, an oil lobbying firm based in Dallas. 2 of those donors had cases pending before the Environmental Affairs Subcommittee. That landed even harder. "Stop it," Green said, her voice shaking. "Now you're twisting everything. You know how this works. Members get offers, we make appearances, it's normal." Jasmine raised her hand calmly. "It's not the appearance, it's the pattern. The same names keep popping up, same jets, same hotels, and no disclosures." She stepped away from the mic, walking slowly in front of the dais, her voice softening, not weak, but personal. "Let me ask you something," Congresswoman Jasmine said, pausing. "Why did you meet with Nicholas Averill, the CEO of West Burbridge? 3 weeks after voting against the Clean Water Accountability Act? That vote killed the amendment restricting runoff exemptions for oil firms like his." Green blinked. "I didn't meet him," she said. "You were photographed with him. On the terrace at El Encanto," Jasmine replied calmly. "The photo was posted, then deleted. A printed screenshot slid across the table from the clerk. There it was, Green, smiling in sunglasses, sitting beside a man holding a whiskey glass with a badge reading Nicholas A. The photo spread through the room like wildfire. "You didn't know the camera was watching?" Jasmine added. "But the internet never forgets." Green tried to speak but faltered, opening and closing her mouth twice. She reached for her water but didn't drink. Jasmine let the silence hang. "This isn't about partisanship," she said finally. "It's about trust. You built your platform on being anti-elite, anti-corruption, anti-establishment. But what happens when that mask falls off?" No one responded. Green stayed silent, but outside the room, the news was already spreading uncontrollably. Marjorie Taylor Greene was known for never backing down. Her brand was built on being louder, more aggressive, more defiant than anyone else. But now, sitting at the table surrounded by evidence, cameras, and a stunned committee, her usual fire flickered weakly. The meltdown started slowly, her fingers tapping nervously on the desk, her eyes darting around, searching for someone to save her. But no one came. Then she snapped. "This is a damn ambush!" she shouted, standing so quickly her chair scraped the floor. "This entire hearing is a smear job. Where's the due process, huh?" The chairman tried to speak. "Congresswoman, Green, please—" "No! I'm not sitting here while some activist in a blazer reads lies written by God knows who," she barked, pointing a trembling finger at Jasmine Crockett. The room fell silent once more. Jasmine stood firm at her podium, slowly lifting her eyes. "I've given you names, records, documents, photos, timestamps. Nothing I've presented is speculation. You just don't like the mirror being held up." "You're out of line," Green hissed. "No," Jasmine replied. "I'm finally in line, and I'm not moving." Her voice was calm and deliberate, not theatrical, but something far more powerful. Honest and believable, the kind of tone that breaks through every screen in America. A staffer tried to slip Green a note, but she brushed it away. "Why don't you talk about what your donors are doing, huh? Talk about all the dark money behind your campaign," Green shouted. "You think you're clean? You think you're some hero?" "I'm not here to perform," Jasmine answered calmly. "I'm here to ask the questions the public deserves answers to, and every time you scream or deflect, you confirm why those answers matter." The chairman tried to regain control. "Let's restore order to the hearing," but Green wasn't finished. "You want drama? Fine. Here it is," she snapped. "I have nothing to hide. Nothing. Unlike the rest of you who smile for the cameras and lie behind the scenes." Jasmine tilted her head slightly. and then laid out the third account opened in Green's name under Atlantic East Solutions LLC, linked to a short-term rental property in Tampa that received multiple deposits from PACs after Green voted against rental regulation reform. The words hit hard. Green didn't respond. Silence followed. Earlier she had barked and clawed, but now, for the first time, she looked unsure, tired, and exposed, with cameras capturing every second. Outside, the story was breaking wide open. Cable networks interrupted programming. The video feed went viral before Jasmine even sat down, and people weren't just watching but dissecting it. Some cheered, others panicked, some were uncertain, but no one could look away. Inside the hearing room, the meltdown had done more than expose Green's pressure point. It shifted momentum. What started as a shouting match was turning into an investigation, and the change in posture among committee members was palpable. They were no longer just spectators. They were genuinely concerned. Jasmine said nothing more during that segment. She simply closed her folder and quietly reached for a glass of water while Green fumed silently, her anger slowly turning into fear. But fear can make people reckless, and Green wasn't one to go down quietly. The hearing recessed 15 minutes early, the gavel coming down sharply as committee members shuffled out with tight jaws and unfinished notes. The tension wasn't confined to the room. It spread through every hallway, elevator, and phone line in the Capitol. Jasmine Crockett stayed calm, gathering her folders slowly, ignoring the noise, sideways glances, and repeated requests from 3 different aides for a hallway statement. She gave them all the same answer. Not yet. Meanwhile, in the hallway, Marjorie Taylor Greene paced angrily. No cameras around, only voices. "You don't let a junior congresswoman come in here and try to smear me," she barked at her tall, sharp-eyed aide clutching his phone. "This whole thing's a setup. Someone's behind her. I want names." He nodded quickly. "We're trying to get ahead of it. We have a statement ready blaming political weaponization, deep state spin, the usual. Should we release it now or wait?" "For now. And tell Tucker I'll do the show tonight," she snapped. 10 minutes. No. Fluff was just around the corner as Jasmine quietly passed a group of staffers who all fell silent mid-whisper when she appeared. She avoided eye contact with everyone except one, a young black intern, maybe 19 or 20, who gave her a look filled not just with admiration, but deep gratitude. Jasmine offered a brief smile and kept walking. 2 floors up, in a quieter hallway, Representative Alan Dorsey, a moderate from Oregon, was already on a call with his chief of staff. "We've got to distance ourselves," he said firmly. "I don't care what she meant to the base. This is about to go nuclear. You think the files are legit?" the voice on the other end asked. "She read them too smoothly," Dorsey replied. "That wasn't theater. That was strategy." Outside, the press lined up along Independence Avenue, cameras everywhere, microphones clipped to lapels. A CNN correspondent rehearsed his lead while producers counted down from 10. Everyone wanted a piece of the story. Inside a side conference room, Greene sat with her communications director and a lawyer. Her tone was different now, less fire, more calculation. "What's worst case?" she asked, eyes fixed on the table. The lawyer, an older man with a salt and pepper beard, cleared his throat. "If Crockett's documents are real and she pushes for a formal ethics inquiry, we're talking potential censure, maybe more. The financial stuff alone could snowball into FEC violations, IRS red flags, even DOJ interest if they decide to investigate." Greene said nothing, just stared. "What about public support?" the communications director asked. "We'll keep the base," Greene replied. "They don't care about PAC names or plain numbers. They care that I fight." The lawyer glanced at her. "They care, until it starts to look like you lied." Meanwhile, in a small office behind the hearing room, Jasmine sat with her chief of staff, sipping cold coffee. "You know they'll say this was a takedown. They'll call you a plant, a puppet, the works," her aide said. Jasmine smiled, though there was a weight to it. They can say whatever they want, she said, but when I look people in the eye back home, I'll be able to say one thing with certainty. What's that? I told the truth, and I told the guilty one, she said flatly. Didn't even try to deny it. After that last document, she tried yelling. Didn't work this time. It was the kind of moment that bypassed the usual media filter and went straight to people's guts. Something about it felt undeniably real. No matter your politics, Green's unraveling wasn't just news, it was a reckoning. Overnight, Jasmine became a household name. Clips of her calm composure spread like wildfire. One tweet read, "If Grace Under Fire had a face, it'd be Jasmine Crockett." A TikTok remix turned her line, "I told the truth, and I told it with receipts," into a viral chorus over a bass-heavy beat. Teenagers who had never even heard of a House hearing were quoting her in videos. Cable news struggled to keep up. Some tried to spin it as partisan warfare, but the evidence was too concrete, the documentation too airtight, and the silence from Green's camp too telling. Even among Green's staunchest supporters, cracks began to show. At a town hall in Grand Junction, Colorado, a woman in a green 2022 hoodie stood up and asked her local congressman a question he wasn't ready for. Why aren't y'all talking about the PAC money? If it was fake, she'd say it loud. She ain't said nothing. Talk radio lit up with callers. Some defended Green, others didn't. She fought for us, but now it looks like she fought for herself too, said one caller from Wichita. Online, right-wing influencers hesitated. A few tried to dig up old clips and tweets to discredit Jasmine, but nothing stuck. She hadn't yelled, hadn't taken cheap shots, just presented documents and stood her ground. The attacks bounced off like rubber bullets. Meanwhile, congressional offices were swamped with calls, some demanding Green resign, others calling for an investigation, and a few just wanting clarity. The Speaker's office declined to comment, but insiders leaked that quiet conversations had already taken place behind closed doors, with whispers of potential censure or more. Through it all, Jasmine stayed silent. No press tour, no grandstanding, just a simple post on her congressional site thanking constituents for their support and reaffirming her commitment to transparency. That silence spoke louder: to regroup, control the narrative, and find a way to discredit the documents, the lawyer continued. But outside Green's office, the story had already grown legs. Jasmine didn't have to say another word. The public was writing the narrative for her. The louder the reaction got, the more pressure mounted for action. By the third day, Green's office looked more like a bunker than a workspace. Blinds shut, phones ringing non-stop, staffers whispering in corners. Her chief of staff, red-eyed and running on fumes, punched buttons on the copier like it owed him money. "Is she coming in?" one aide asked quietly. "She's still in the conference room," another replied. "On the phone with legal again." Inside, Marjorie Taylor Greene sat hunched over a speakerphone, surrounded by stacks of documents, half-drunk coffee, and 3 exhausted faces. "She's not backing down," her attorney said. "She's holding the line and doing it smart. No leaks, no sound bites, just evidence. That's dangerous." Greene rubbed her forehead and asked, "So what do I do?" "You don't resign," the lawyer replied firmly. "But you also don't go live again. Every time you speak, you bleed." A statement was drafted, carefully worded, but Greene shook her head. "I don't do careful," she snapped. "You do now," her advisor replied bluntly. In the Capitol cafeteria, 2 aides from different offices exchanged glances over lunch trays. "She was always loud," one said, "but now she's quiet. That's how you know it's real." Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's team fielded calls from journalists, elected officials, and even former members of Congress. Some offered congratulations, others support, and a few were cautious, hedging their words in case the tide turned again. But Jasmine didn't gloat or take a victory lap. That Friday, she was back in her district office, sitting in on a housing complaint meeting with senior residents in Dallas. "You're not tired?" her aide asked quietly afterward. Jasmine smiled faintly. "I'm always tired," she replied, "but I'm not done." Back in Washington, things were moving fast. A bipartisan group within the House committee began quietly reviewing the documents Crockett had submitted. It wasn't a formal investigation, not yet, but it was the first step, the kind that mattered. What usually takes months happened in days. One by one, Greene's allies began to pull back. Some issued vague statements about letting the process play out, while others dodged reporters entirely. Only the fringe remained vocal, shouting conspiracy theories online, calling Jasmine a plant, and claiming the documents were forged, despite none being disproved. By the next week, 3 Republican members quietly requested an internal ethics review, a move that signaled Greene's own party was no longer willing to defend her blindly. 2 days later, she released a written statement. No apology, no acknowledgement, just accusations that Jasmine Crockett was weaponizing the process to smear true patriots. But by then, the narrative had shifted. Editorial boards across the country wrote about transparency, accountability, and the importance of character. In Greene's own district, a local poll showed her approval rating had dropped 20 points in just 7 days. At a Rotary Club in Mon, Georgia, a former donor stood up and declared, "I don't care what letter's next to your name. If you lie to the people and get caught, you shouldn't represent them." The fallout wasn't just political, it was personal. Staffers considered jumping ship, donors stopped answering calls, and lobbyists suddenly had scheduling conflicts. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stayed focused, answering emails and continuing her work. She hadn't taken Greene down with insults or theatrics. She did it with paperwork, poise, and facts, and the country took notice. But the real test wasn't just Greene's downfall. It was what Congress and voters would do next. By the end of the month, the headlines shifted, the frenzy quieted, but the questions grew sharper. Voters across the nation had witnessed something rare, evidence presented with discipline, no theatrics, and no backtracking. For once, a political moment felt real. In interviews, people from coast to coast kept saying the same thing. She didn't yell, she didn't insult. She just showed. At a community center in Akron, Ohio, a pastor told his congregation, "Integrity is quiet. Loud doesn't always mean right." And the truth, it doesn't need to shout. Jasmine Crockett wasn't chasing the spotlight. She didn't hire a new publicist or jump on every TV show that called. Instead, she chose a sit-down with a local journalist in Dallas. The interview was calm and focused. "Did you want this to be a takedown?" the reporter asked. "No," Jasmine replied. "I wanted people to see what happens when you follow the trail. Real power doesn't come from shouting. It comes from being prepared." The journalist nodded. "Are you worried about retaliation?" "I'm aware of it, but I'm not worried," she said. "I didn't do this to win a fight. I did it because people deserve better than smoke and mirrors." That phrase stuck. In Washington, the House Ethics Committee quietly opened a formal inquiry into Greene's campaign finances. No press conference, just a notice that her records were under review. For Greene, the storm didn't pass. It just moved indoors. Legal consultations, staff turnover, travel cutbacks. Once a regular on evening panels, she now declined interviews. No more sound bites, just silence and strategy. Meanwhile, Jasmine's recognition grew. She was invited to speak at Georgetown, Howard, and UC Berkeley, not as a hero, but as a voice of reason. Jasmine Crockett's message was simple. Don't confuse loud with right, do your homework, and never walk into a room afraid of the facts. High school students wrote her letters. Young women shared how seeing someone like them stand up with a binder and take down a lie gave them hope, and voters felt seen, like someone finally said what they'd been thinking for years. Politics doesn't have to be a circus, and maybe, just maybe, truth still matters. One evening, she spoke at a town hall in Garland, Texas. Standing room only, no campaign signs, just people waiting to hear from the woman who stood toe-to-toe with one of the loudest voices in Congress and didn't flinch. "I'm not here to, talk about scandals or headlines," she began. "I'm here to talk about what comes next." She paused, scanning the crowd. What happened in that hearing room wasn't about one person. It was about what we allow in our politics and whether we still care enough to ask, is this honest? Is this fair? Is this who we want to be? She let the silence settle before adding, "Power without truth is just noise, and we've had enough noise." The room erupted, not with chaos, but with steady applause from people who finally felt heard. Later that night, Jasmine sat alone at her kitchen table, the binder from the hearing still in her bag, unopened. She didn't need to look. She knew what it said. More importantly, now so did everyone else. Because the truth, spoken clearly, and without fear, doesn't just win arguments. It shifts culture. If this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in honesty, accountability, and the power of facts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that matter.